Okay, today we're going to tie a very simple woolly booger. And this works great for trout in some instances, but it's great on crappie and bass and all other panfish. So you notice I've got a number 6 long shank streamer hook in the vise and a cone head. And that cone head kind of flops around a little bit. So we want to stabilize that. We're going to do that with a number of wraps of lead wire. So we'll put on like a half a dozen wraps of lead wire, and then I'm going to double it up. Get a couple layers of wire, maybe start of a 3rd layer. Okay, now we can helicopter the wire off. And push all of that lead wire up into the cone. And that stabilizes the cone so it's less likely to move around. Now we use, in this case, some 70 denier red ultra thread. Just because I happen to have that on the bench all loaded with thread. Trim off our tag. Wrapped up over some of that lead wire in there just to hold it in place, and then come back to the bend in the hook. Which is about where the barb is on the hook. Now the first material we're going to tie in is marabou. And we're going to use just one marabou plume. You could use more than that, but one is really all that's necessary for the most part. And we want to measure that tail so it's about as long as the entire hook. And we'll pinch that in our left hand and hold it on top of the shank of the hook. Now we'll take a couple of loose wraps, actually 3 loose wraps, and then pull that down to cinch it in place, and several more loose wraps. Now some tires would snip that off right here, but that creates kind of a bump in the whole tying sequence. So what we're going to do is we're going to jump that thread up to nearly to the front and take a couple of wraps and cinch the marabou down there, and then snip off the excess up towards the front of the fly. And we'll tie that down and run that thread back to the bend of the hook. That gives us a nice smooth base to tie down the chenille. Now, we're going to want to use a rib in this case, mainly to make the fly more durable. So we'll tie in a little bit of gold wire at the back. Then it's nice to have some flash in this fly. We could have actually tied in the flash. This is crystal flash. Could have tied that in before we tied in the gold wire. So we'll take about 3 strands of crystal flash. Snip that off. Now what I like to do is to loop that around the thread, pinch it between my fingers, take it up and start the tie in on my side of the hook. Then take half of that bundle or 3 strands around to the other side and tie it off and back to the start of the marabou. And then for the crystal flash, I usually trim that off right about the back of the marabou. Now we've got the chenille to tie on. I'm using some white polar chenille, and we're going to strip off some of those fibers right up the base down to the core, and that's going to give us a nice smooth tie-in point. So we tie that in. Come up to the front of the fly, right behind the cone, and wrap the chenille. This is going to be a crappie catcher, I guarantee you. Run that chenille all the way up right behind the cone. Almost jam it inside the cone. Tie that off nice and tight. Trim off the excess. Now we're going to tie in some saddle hackle. So get a nice webby hackle fiber, and we don't want to use that area right up there by the tips. We're going to brush this back and tie it in by the tip. And snip off the excess right at the cone. Now we'll wrap the feather in a spiral fashion. Back towards the marabou. When we reach that point, we'll grab a hold of our copper wire and take 2 fairly tight wraps, at least 2, maybe 3, fairly tight wraps right at the back, the tie-in point on that feather. And then kind of wiggle that gold wire up through the saddle hackle Try not to trap many fibers. Up to the front of the fly, and that helps hold that saddle hackle in place. Now we can tie down the gold wire right behind the cone and helicopter it off. And then go back to our tail and trim off the balance of our saddle hackle. Now it's time to whip finish right behind the cone. 5 to 7 turns will do it. A little bit of head cement. And there we have the completed woolly booger. Ready to fish. Next time we see that, it'll be hanging out of a crappie mouth.